Welcome, everyone, to Mindful Leadership Beyond Borders. This is Betska, the Guru Coach, together with Raj Vashisht from Delhi, India. I'm from Canada, and we're delighted today to have as our guest on a very sensitive but absolutely necessary topic of suicide. And let me tell you a bit about Cathie first. She's a #1 best-selling author, certified grief educator, a life coach, certified teaching parent. That sounds very interesting. We should have more of a discussion on that certification. Energy worker and former social worker. So she is well equipped to have our discussion here today. She's passionate about helping suicide loss survivors rebuild a life of meaning and joy. And this is so critical. When you lose someone to suicide, everyone must be devastated at some level or another. So we need to know how to cope with it, how to survive it. And her award-winning book, Your Suicide Didn't Kill Me, and I have a delightful copy here, Choosing to Live and Love After Loss, shares her deeply personal journey of healing and hope. Keyword is hope, yeah. So with warmth, wisdom, and authenticity, Cathie empowers others to move through their grief, rediscover love, purpose, and connection. Welcome, Cathie, to our podcast this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today.
Such a pleasure. Your book radiates love. And so it's kind of a lovely topic to cover here today. While it's painful, we need your wisdom to help others just in case they have to go through it. So why don't we start by you sharing with us why you wrote Your Suicide Didn't Kill Me, and how did your personal journey shape the message of the book? There must be a deep story in there somewhere.
Well, it's kind of an interesting story because I never thought that I would write a book. And I was having an angel reading, and the woman who was doing the angel reading said, "Oh, the angels are saying you're going to write a book and it's going to be a bestseller." And I was like, "Yeah, right." And and it did. Yeah. And the reason I wanted to write the book was, you're right, that grief and suicide, very, very sensitive, vulnerable topics. And I really felt that I could help someone who was also a survivor of suicide loss by sharing my journey of, from when he died by suicide to, when I published the book, which actually came out 2 years ago. So it has been quite a journey. And yeah, I wanted to help people. That's the bottom line. I have a purpose statement that I wrote many years ago. And my purpose in life is to raise the vibration of love in the world. And I just thought, what a great way that I can do that through sharing my experience in this book.
So tell us more about the person you lost.
So my first husband, Brian, died by suicide in the year 2000. And we had been married 15 years and we had 2 children. And I never thought ever that he would die by suicide. And you'll notice I'm saying die by suicide. I don't say committed suicide, because suicide is not a crime where I live in Canada. In 25 countries, to this day, it still is a crime. But for most countries, it is not a crime. So the words that I use are die by suicide. I was, as you mentioned, I'm former social worker, and Brian and I actually were certified teaching parents working with dual diagnosed adolescents in a treatment home, and we had suicide prevention training. We had talked about suicide. 3 months before he died, I had a young girl who was 16 that I was working with. She died by suicide, and you could see the turmoil that I was going through. But we promised each other that we would never die by suicide. And he kept that promise until he couldn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what do you think? What did him in? What was going on in his head
Okay,
and his heart, do you
sure,
think?
sure. It was a, it wasn't just one issue.
Okay.
We had financial issues, we had parenting issues,
Mm.
um, uh, we had work issues, and then he herniated a disc in his back, and he was
Mm.
in such excruciating pain, and he was
Ah.
prescribed Demerol for the pain, and how he died is he actually left the house and he was found at the University of Calgary, and he took the 60 Demerol. Um, so
Oh.
yeah,
Wow. That's very difficult, I'm sure, for
absolutely
you and
every story of death, and if I talk about suicide, but any death, any loss,
yeah.
there's trauma
Mm.
involved. Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking one of the thoughts I had this morning or late last night was about the MAID program in
Hmm.
Canada,
Hmm. Hmm.
where
Yeah,
um
medically assisted in dying. Yeah, right.
yeah, I'm
Yes.
not sure if Raj or other viewers, I don't know whether this exists around the world, but you can, if you are in great physical pain, you can actually ask the medical profession to assist you in dying. And
Hmm.
I thought to myself, I wonder from God's point of view if that is considered suicide.
And I've had that same thought. And
Mm,
I've also gone through a lot of really grappling with what does God think about suicide? Because I was raised
yeah.
to think like you don't do that. There's taboo, there's
Mm-hmm.
shame involved. And I I now believe that God loves us all. And no
Mm-hmm.
matter what we do, and as a parent, I could never condemn my kids for doing something that I didn't agree with. And I don't think God wants us to die by suicide, but I think God is a forgiving God. And so I
Mm-hmm.
actually support MAID.
Ah,
Hmm.
okay. Oh,
Hmm.
I am sure that that's such a difficult decision. I had a friend who chose that as well, and she was so vibrant. She was like late 30s, early 40s, and developed a brain tumor.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it was just getting bigger and bigger. And they just said, you know,
Yeah,
it was going to be messy in the end unless
right.
she,
And
so
and
I
here's
understand.
an
Yeah.
option. Yeah,
Yeah.
here's an
Hmm.
option. And I think that's what it is for me with suicide, because in the beginning I thought, why would he choose that? Why would he want to hurt me? And it was all
Hmm.
about this idea of choice. What I now
Hmm.
understand is suicide is not a choice. You and I have have what I call like tools in our toolkit. And if
Hmm.
we are going through a tough time, we pull out one of our tools and we might
Hmm.
talk to a friend, we might journal, we might go to a therapist, we might do all kinds of different things. For somebody who is really suicidal, they they don't see that there are any more tools left.
Right.
So
Yeah, I
there's
get it.
not a choice. It's not, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do this. It's like suicide is the only way. It's no longer considered a choice.
Mm. I
Hmm.
see. That's what's going through their heads.
Hmm.
There is no
Yeah.
other choice.
There's
Yeah.
no other options. They've gone through
Hmm.
all their options, and
Hmm.
this is the last option, but it's different
Right.
than it being a choice.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I get the difference in the language. So, as a
Hmm.
certified grief educator, how do you help people move through
Hmm.
grief, especially those grieving a suicide loss? And I can imagine, and my business as an executive and life coach, I help people move through a myriad of complex emotions, but I can't imagine anything more serious than suicide loss in terms
Hmm.
of the complexity of emotion. So, how do you help them move through that grief?
Well, I start from a place of I'm not there to fix. I'm not there to fix
Ah,
their grief. I'm there to
right.
walk beside them and to
Okay.
help them in, to take the steps, because that's what really
Hmm.
helped me is getting up every day and deciding. I mean, I'm not I chose to keep moving. right? It's different than
Mm-hmm.
what I'm talking about, choice with suicide. But as a survivor, I chose every day to keep moving forward. There were days that I didn't, and I wanted to stay in bed with the covers over my head, but I
Mm,
had two children to take care of. And so
mm,
that option wasn't really available. I wanted to create a legacy for my family, for my kids, and keep moving forward. So how I help um, people who are grieving is
mhm.
a lot of listening, a lot of education, because we don't talk about grief a lot. We don't
No, we
talk about the
don't.
different stages of grief and
Mm-hmm.
how it's not linear. You think you're going, you know, from point A to point B, from denial to um, anger and bargaining and depression and acceptance and then David Kessler and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and Kubler-Ross was the one that came up with the 5 stages of grief that I just mentioned, and David Kessler and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross collaborated, and he wrote a book called Finding Meaning, and that was so key for me. Like, if
Mm,
Brian died, and what was the meaning for me? What it
right.
forced me to do was to come out from, I lived a little bit behind his shadow. He was very gregarious, big, big personality. And it forced me to really find myself and to go on
Ah,
a journey of who am I and what difference can I make in this world?
mhm. Right on. I'm curious about what was the reaction from your children? How old were they, and what was the
hmm
reaction?
hmm My son was 14 and my daughter was 10,
Wow.
and devastation doesn't even, it's not the right word. It was beyond
Mm,
devastating.
mm,
Um, my, you know, my son idolized his dad. He was the
mm,
basketball coach. He was the soccer coach.
mm,
He was always there, and it was very difficult for him. And my daughter was 10, and everybody grieves in a different way. Some are
mm.
more overt in their grief, and some are very quiet in their grief. And I noticed that between the two kids. But
Ah,
it meant many nights just sitting and talking and listening
mm,
and
mm.
and being there for them. In and amongst my own grief, I was working on helping my children move through grief. And we all went
Wow.
for therapy. As a social worker, I know when I need to sit on the what I call the other chair. And
Mhm.
and so we sat in the other chair and received counseling. And that was so important.
Did you
Mhm.
go as a family or as individuals?
We went as individuals,
Okay.
and yeah. And I talked with my kids about what they felt would be best for each, and we all decided that we would go as individuals.
Hmm.
Hmm hmm
Wow. I can imagine what's going through a 10-year-old's head and a
hmm
14-year-old's head, my
hmm
dad has
hmm
abandoned me, or whatever,
Yeah,
you know.
sure. And
Hmm.
I write in my book, one of the chapters is called "Can We Get a Dog?" Because 3 days after he
Oh.
died, my daughter came and said, "Can we get a dog now?" Because he was allergic
Oh.
to animals. And I thought, well, that's
Oh.
an interesting way of processing grief. But we
Yeah.
ended up getting a dog, and it was so healing for our family.
Mm.
So when
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
talking about grief, I mean, there's all kinds of different grief. It could be the death of someone that you love. It could be your spouse, your child, could be your pet dying, could be you're losing your job, you're
Mm.
losing your faith. I mean, it goes on and
Mm.
on of what grief can encompass. Suicide
Hmm.
is a piece that I work with people that doesn't matter what they're grieving, what they're grieving.
Mm.
Hmm
So, but is there a difference between helping someone, through the complexity of suicide loss versus a divorce or losing a great job or whatever? Is there a
I think
difference?
I think there's so many similarities to the grief, and it depends on the person and
Ah,
their experience of grief. So what it
mm,
looks like for one person is going to be very different from another person. And I think, there's part of me that wants to say, and suicide, is worse, right? Because you've got all this stigma attached. But there's stigma attached to losing your job,
Yeah,
to
there is.
losing your faith. There's stigma there
Yeah.
too. So, I mean, my husband is not the only person I've lost in my life. I lost a brother. My parents had a miscarriage. So I've experienced a lot of different loss in my life as well.
Wow, what a great topic. Very needed topic, folks. We're going to be back with part 2 with Cathie Godfrey in a moment. We'll be right back.